What is going on, everyone? We have just finished the first big Sunday of NFL football, and my word, are we going to be overreacting to some stuff? Maybe. We're going to talk about some things, of course. There is just so much information to talk about, and like 95% of it won't matter next week because, man, there were some excellent games for football purposes. There were some good games for football purposes or fantasy. And then there were some terrible games. Looking at you, Green Bay. I don't know what happened there, guys, but we're going to be breaking it all down. We don't have a lot of time to waste because we got to talk about 14 games today, recapping it and seeing all the ins and outs and do's and don'ts of everything going on with this week one of NFL football recap here on Gridiron Ratings. I, again, am Matt McCarthy, Senior Redraft Analyst for Gridiron Ratings, and thank you for joining us. So, going to be kicking it off first with, a little bit of a team close to my heart. I'm not saying I like, I'm not saying I don't, but I'm looking over at the Philadelphia Eagles and the Atlanta Falcons. Can we choose which one I'm talking about there? Philadelphia wins this game 32-6. So sticking over on the Philadelphia side, my one big thing when I was looking at the previews was how are these tight ends going to work? Are they going to be playing on the field at the same time? Are they going to be splitting it up? What's going to be the big priority there? Goddard outsnaps Zach Ertz here 52-41, also out targets him 5-2. He scores, which is a pleasant surprise, but the wide receivers really the big garners of real fantasy points in this one. I mean, that route that Devonta Smith ran, I believe Zach Ertz had the no-touch interference sort of situation. Let him run while it gets a touchdown pass there from Jalen Hurts. Is there really too much to talk about with Philadelphia outside of how good Devonta Smith looks, along with a lot of the other rookies? Jalen Waddle and Jamar Chase also had excellent week ones. Particularly, no. Kenneth Gainwell is a little bit interesting. Backup running back there with Philadelphia, along with Miles Sanders to encompass that backfield situation. All 9 of his carries came in the second half. I think they were a little bit more in cruise control. Am I saying you should go out and pick up Kenneth Gainwell? If you'd like to, by all means. There's a few better waiver wire options. Some leagues don't even have waivers open from the first week of news. So guys like Tyson Williams, if he was still out there, he should not have been. And Latavius Murray, then you kicking off that game in about 20 minutes or so. Those are more interesting pickups than Kenneth Gainwell. But if you're looking at further down the line, those are really guys to look. That's a guy to look to there with Gainwell. Otherwise, Jalen Hurts. Electric. This was a week that I was very high on him. I had around quarterback 7 or 8. This was a week. If you had Hurts, I was not on him in the preseason, but I thought looked at this week one matchup with Atlanta. This is one I said, yeah, if you were a team that really wanted to invest in him, this would be a spot to do so. But the Atlanta side was a little bit more disappointing. One thing I was not disappointed was with Kyle Pitts. Saw a lot of targets, did not see a lot of fantasy points. And one thing I like about that is that no one really got to have a big sort of victory lap over on Twitter. 8 targets for Calvin Ridley, 8 targets for Kyle Pitts. The fact that he went out and had about a 7 fantasy point game, that's fine with me because no one got to say that he was bad and no one got to say that he was great. He was on the field quite often. The only skills players that were on the field more often than Pitts was Ridley and Mike Davis. So there's a few things I have a little bit of worry for. One, how possible is Matt Ryan getting this offense rolling, especially in both the deep ball and in the red zone? Only 3 passes were attempted past 10 yards. Only 3 passes were completed past 10 yards. Excuse me. And this was a bad team in the red zone last year, so we're trying to figure out, was it Julio Jones's fault or was it the Atlanta Falcons at large? Falcons ran 19 plays within the red zone. 12 came in the first quarter alone. They were not able to complete touchdowns on those drives, had to settle for field goals. And I think it really affected how the overall ability for this team to play out the rest of the game came from their inability to score early on. There's a team that was around 26 last year in red zone conversion percentage, came away with only 6 points in those few drives, while the Eagles ran 28 plays in the Falcons red zone, came in with 27 points in that regard. Some waiver wire stuff was good with the Falcons. Russell Gage was a player I was talking about a little bit in the preseason based on how often he'd be playing as the second fill to Calvin Ridley on the outside. We saw Kyle Pitts see a good amount of targets. I want to see more of Gage, but if you're looking for receivers to cut at the back end of your bench, I have never have a problem with that. I wasn't really advocating for drafting receivers towards, if you're talking about a 15-round draft, after round 10 or so, I was saying if you don't want to even draft those guys, look for a higher upside sort of players and, the running back, tight end, or quarterback positions, I was completely fine with that. The other one thing, Wayne Gallman was not active for this game. So with Gallman not active, I think Mike Davis at 15 carries might be one of the season highs for him, because the 6 targets is really what we're very much saying that's what we want to be his game. That's really what's the kind of skill set that we're trying to look for out of Mike Davis, third most targets on the team for the day. But if he's going to be getting a good amount of carries, the second most on the team for the day was Cordell Patterson, the only 2 running backs after. Wayne Gallman, I think, was only not active because he was such a late addition to the team and your team needs to get acclimated to and doesn't play on special teams. Can he come in and take anything from Patterson? Of course. Is he going to start working into what Davis is able to accrue on the ground? That's going to be a different story entirely. It's something we have to look for when Wayne Gallman is, in fact, active, though. Next game, New York Jets at the Carolina Panthers. Carolina wins this game 19-14. Starting with the New York Jets, the one big thing was how comfortable was Wilson going to be coming over from the preseason, where I thought he looked very good and very much up to speed with the NFL game. Now, the problem is that you then get to real life action, you get to real defensive measures, and, well, we have to start with the offensive line. Sacked 6 times in this game and hit 10 times. That's a pretty ugly start. Also losing Mekhi Becton. He's going to be out about a month. I'm a little worried that if your quarterback might get hit on one of every 4 dropbacks, that's not something I'm particularly fond seeing with the team spending such a high draft capital on their real star quarterback of the future, hopefully. The other thing I'm really looking at this New York Jets offense, and we want to try and figure out, was there going to be fantasy relevant players past Corey Davis? I don't know how big of an overreaction is. I don't believe it is. But if there's a player, I think there's the only fantasy relevant option right now. It is Corey Davis. The second touchdown, cool. It came in the 2-minute warning right at the end of the contest. It was a solid enough play. Man coverage, just got caught in the front corner of the end zone. Cool. Yay. Fun for him. 2 touchdown day. All things nice and considered. But beyond him, I wasn't really seeing too much real confidence out of the receiving core. And with Jamison Crowder coming back eventually from COVID, that's going to be another sort of gear in the whole machine. And I don't know how much it's going to really hurt Davis and the whole group at large. He would be my second favorite Jets receiver, though, when he is indeed active. The rookies, between Moore and between Carter's worth holding on to, and Moore, again, if you feel like letting him go by this point, I think you shouldn't be drafting the rookies regardless. But Carter, I think it's worth holding on to right now, just to see exactly what this running back group is going to really play out. But I don't think it's particularly a good idea to really be, playing a running back for a team that they're going to be seeing anyway is like 9 carries, right? So I don't think this is a particularly good offense, and I don't think that's a very much of an overreaction. The team ran a collective of like 2.6 yards per carry. That's not something I think is very nice. Over on the Carolina side, though, can the Carolina support 3 wide receivers with Christian McCaffrey around? The early answer, I think, is no. Of the total 68 offensive plays, Christian McCaffrey was involved for 30 of them. So 44% of all offensive plays is running through Christian McCaffrey. That really shows you what A, Carolina is going to do, and B, what the 1.01 for fantasy really is and should have been, which is Christian McCaffrey. Chuba Hubbard, unfortunately, only had 2 touches in the game. And with Hubbard just not seeing much work because McCaffrey's out there so often, he's just a handcuff. That's really all we're going to have to be thinking about him this point and going forward. Looking over to the receivers, Moore dominated the overall work in terms of targets. And I'd like to say that Anderson doesn't come in with 1 reception on a weekly basis, does get completely bailed out with this 57-yard score. I like seeing things like that. But it's going to be a matter of, does Terrace Marshall, does Anderson, does Moore, are they all competitive and fantasy options for you, with the real looking of how much McCaffrey really accounts for this team? And that's really what it's going to be. It's McCaffrey and then the other guys. 2 seasons ago in 2019, there's a player who have almost 1,100 offensive snaps. He's so much of what the team is. Got a question in the chat. I have Austin Eckler and Miles Sanders want to pick up one of the handcuffs. Do I get Kenneth Gainwell or Larry Roundtree? We're going to get into the Chargers game in just a little bit, but Roundtree, I think, at least established himself that he's highest of the pecking order outside of Eckler. Kenneth Gainwell, we just covered before. it looks like most of what his work came was when that game was already starting going downhill overall. The Falcons were no longer competitive in the game, and they were just trying to not, really dig Miles Sanders too much in the touch, sort of workload, being a week one in a comfortable position. I would lean Gainwell as an overall. I think he has the clearest path to work if it's just him. We're talking purely a handcuff situation. Otherwise, with Roundtree, Kelly, Jackson, I believe Kelly was the one that wasn't even active for this game. But it's still a matter of if Eckler was to go down, I think you have three guys there. Right now for Philadelphia, it looks like Gainwell is at least a directive sort of approach for them. Moving on to Pittsburgh Steelers versus Buffalo Bills. Pittsburgh wins this one 23-16. A little bit of a road upset here. I'm a little bit happy with this game because I thought it was going to be a bad game for fantasy. This was the one I thought was a good real-life game, a very good defensive game, but we don't like defense here. We like offense. And the only other players you really came away happy with starting was probably Deontay Johnson over on the Pittsburgh side and Stephon Diggs over for the Buffalo side. Now, Josh Allen really didn't sink your day, but he didn't really help you in any sort of regard either. It was a kind of a gross game with 8 punts in this game for both teams in the first half alone. I mean, one big thing coming over from the Pittsburgh side is how shot has been is that 600 pass attempts sort of still viable. It's an overly gross game. The Pittsburgh defense kept it in it, but Ben really wasn't any sort of factor as to why they won this one. Incomplete on 11 of 23 passes in the second half. I didn't think he ever looked really impressive. But we kind of said from the beginning that this was going to be a game that we didn't really want to take too much away from and say, okay, they played poorly because of this and because of that, and we have to think about that going forward. Because like Najee Harris, you weren't excited really with the output he had. But Najee Harris, if you're someone who bought into him in the preseason, you said, okay, he's the only guy who's going to get touches. He's got a direct path to work. He has a direct path to being a very good fantasy option for you. Well, he played 100% of the snap percentage at the position in week one. No other running back really got onto the field. It was just Najee Harris there, but behind Big Ben in that backfield. And that's really what you want if you're someone who is looking to have a bounce back in week 2 out of Najee Harris. Otherwise, I do reserve a little bit of judgment to see how the overall receiving core is going to play out for the team. I do believe it is a Deontay Johnson 1, Juju 2, Chase Claypool 3. It did play out a little bit as the hierarchy in this one. But I don't want to say, everything's said and done after one game on the road in a tough environment in Buffalo that they had to have a bunch of, key defensive stops and situations go their way for them to actually win this game. Moving on to Buffalo. I kind of forgot to give them a one big thing on our preview of the game, but in this situation actually ends up coming through that Zach Moss, right? So Zach Moss not active for week 1, which led to Singletary actually becoming an option, which we really did not, especially myself. I didn't want to start Buffalo running back in week 1. I wasn't recommending drafting Buffalo running backs in the preseason. But if there's just one, and if Singletary is going to pick up targets and he's going to run just well enough, especially against a tough, Pittsburgh Steelers defense, I think things change now because him just being even slightly useful now makes him an asset. Where before, if he was splitting between, you have Josh Allen, who's been very good at getting rushing touchdowns, at least 8 in the last 3 seasons. You have Zach Moss, and just any sort of time where you have a guy who is like a low RB2 flex option in Singletary, if he's by himself, now being reduced even further because of Zach Moss being active. If this is something they want to go with, this is now something I'm very much interested in with Devin Singletary. So someone that might be towards the back end of your bench is now getting pushed up a little bit further because if they're going to keep Moss out or not use him, this is very important for Singletary. Moving on to the receivers. Gabriel Davis does score in this game, but we show that he is really 4th in the pecking order behind Diggs, Beasley, and Sanders. Those 3 on field for about 90% of the snaps. I don't really think that Davis is going to be so big of a measure that he's going to really be something that we want to really put into our lineups, especially with Diggs and Beasley having, over double-digit targets, both of them. Beasley, actually, if he's out on your waiver wire, I think he's going to be a good option coming off this 13 target game. Allen threw 51 passes in this. It's going to be a little bit of difference in terms of when they're not going to have 51 passes and not going to have 33 minutes of ball control. But it's something I do want to see. What do the receivers look like past Diggs? Because it really last year was just so much work going to Diggs and so much work being produced off of him. So let's really see how the other options will actually do. Moving on to Minnesota versus Cincinnati. Cincinnati wins this game, the only overtime game, I believe, in week 1. Cincinnati wins 27-24. Start with Minnesota. But one big thing was going to be, is there a tight end that can be viable? If there is one, it's not Chris Herndon yet, or possibly ever. But then again, we do really need to see when he gets a little bit more acclimated. There's a few players you have to really see, between the inactives, guys like Gallman, and we have to see players changing teams like Sony Michel, who wasn't very much used last night with the Rams. Now we have to see exactly how it's going to really be playing out with Herndon as one who really never got it really settled over there in New York. So yay, first off, to Minnesota passing 50 times in this game, total of 15 more times than they did in the previous 2 seasons before. Kirk Cousins, once again, looks like he's going to be an early favorite to be a waiver wire option, because in the first, we see it's almost every year or so that after a certain amount of weeks, Kirk Cousins and his offense opens up. But it did so right here in the passing game in week 1, which is really not something we've really seen out of them. It took them like a month last year to even get to like 35 pass attempts, and they completely eclipsed that here in week 1. Going on to, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, cool, we like that. KJ Osborne, though, I think is something that's really interesting to talk about. For something in deeper leagues, I think he should probably be looked at. Trailed only those two, Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, in team snaps last year. In week 1, but him seeing 9 targets and 7 receptions after not seeing a single target in all of the 9 games he appeared in, really just being a special teams guy in 2020. Just really something to keep an eye on. Looked really towards Twitter. It's like, hey, were you guys hearing anything about this player, in preseason or in the camps? And there was like some preseason buzz, but we saw OBC Johnson last year get some preseason buzz out of Minnesota. So it wasn't really a matter of, hey, do we get the Nom flashback and we're reading too much into preseason stuff that really shouldn't be accounted for? But I think something to really look at, and I don't think, in a normal 12-player waiver, he's not up towards the top half, and it is a fab situation, 2% of your fab, $3, whatever. If you have like a real deep part of your bench, but I think receivers in week 1, we saw that with Russell Gage last year with 114 yards. Let's not just really chase big receiver games the week after, because it can just very much as easily disappear. But it is something to just at least be interested about. Dalvin Cook in this game, 37 touches. We like this. It's almost like between the 50 pass attempts and Dalvin Cook running wild and having a great fantasy day as well. How did Minnesota really end up losing this one? Penalties is not something we talk about for fantasy purpose, but 116 penalty yards over 12 separate penalties. That is something to be wary of. Is just a sloppy defensive team. I know on the Jamar Chase touchdown, the number 21, the cornerback for Minnesota, never really squared his hips around to Chase. I guess he was expecting help over the top. I don't know if they were expecting an underneath pass, something like that, but some weird defensive stuff, some weird penalty stuff. I don't know if Minnesota's got it all together just right just now. Also, Amir Abdullah sliding in Minnesota, which I think was just really nice for all the people who drafted him, 3rd round, like 4 years ago. It was nice to see him still being, sticking around on a team here and there. Moving over to the Cincinnati Bengals. My one big thing was to worry about keeping Joe Burrow upright. Well, he does take 5 sacks in this one in the game where I actually thought he'd be pretty more comfortable in terms of not being sacked more than 2 or 3 times. So that's something to very, very much keep me worried. But I was also worried because he got so many sacks, but he also only attempted 27 passes in a game that also went to overtime. So between Cincinnati not keeping him upright and without even having a ton of pass attempts overall, I don't know exactly kind of what the plan is going to be all year long, especially when you're playing much more strong defensive teams that aren't the Minnesota Vikings. Moving on to Joe Mixon. I was actually kind of curious to see if Joe Mixon had so he has 11 carries of 5 or more yards in week 1, right? So as a joke, I kind of wanted to see, how many times did he have that in all of 2020? Because there was a little bit of me that I kind of thought maybe he just wasn't breaking off any sort of runs of purpose. Well, he had 8 carries of 5 more yards in week 1 in 2020. So 11 in 2021, 8 in 2020. So it's not like he wasn't getting any sort of big yardage or good yardage attempts. Over 5 yards is pretty good in most standards. So he does have a very excellent game. If they're going to have this big usage for him every sort of week, he's going to get involved in the passing game and he's going to be a real focal point for them. The whole, is Joe Mixon a top 12, top 15, top whatever for your running back? Right now, Joe Mixon is at least proving people to say, if you took investment in me in the preseason, I'm at least rewarding you right now with a good week 1 performance. But I had him as like my running back 7 or 8. A lot of people did. There's going to be a spot for Mixon to thrive fantasy-wise. It was here against Minnesota. Moving on to the receivers. Chase had the most impressive week 1 performance of the big, between him, Devonta Smith, Joe and Waddle. Again, I do think it was a pretty simple route that Chase took to, get that over-the-shoulder catch. I think it was just a matter of the Minnesota cornerback just really expected help to be there, and he lined up not facing Chase, and I thought they were thinking there might be a play in the middle of the field or he had safety help. I don't particularly know, but it wasn't a particularly overly impressive throw or impressive route. It just happened to be, oh, look, a touchdown is happening and I let it happen sort of thing for the cornerback. Otherwise, I do have a bad look here. Week 1, I thought Boyd was going to be a safe sort of option to just really see how all things are going to happen. I never played too much into the Jamar Chase drops. He doesn't drop a pass in this game. Excellent. But I thought Boyd would be the second best option at the time behind T. Higgins. Was the worst of the 3. So let's see what they're going to look like in Chicago. Chicago had a poor defensive performance against the receivers of the LA Rams. So let's see what they can, what's going to happen here with the receivers of the Cincinnati Bengals. Moving on to one of, if not the highest scoring, it's got to be 41-33 San Francisco. Yeah, this is the highest scoring game of the week. Unless we do, kickoff has just occurred over here in the Baltimore Ravens game. So let's see exactly how that plays out. But we're going to start with San Fran. San Fran wins this game 41-33. And the one big thing was going to be the running back usage. And here is my big miss of the week and big miss of the week for a lot of people. Raheem Mostert. So he is going to be out for 2 months with a knee injury, something to do with a chipped cartilage in his knee, and that is just devastating. It's really unfortunate. He's getting a lot of hate from people tweeting at him, emailing him. That's terrible. I hate to see that. These guys are trying to do their best, and you can't account for injuries, and it's terrible that every single year just seems to have something has to come up with him. But if you don't have an IR spot available, and you probably should in your leagues, you can drop him if you would like to do so, because we're saying, week 9, 10, 11 might be the earliest we see Raheem Mostert again, even suit up for the 49ers. But otherwise, he should be placed into your IR spots and kind of leave him there for a little bit. Trey Sermon was also inactive for this game, a little bit of a surprise actor, just like Zach Moss was. With him inactive and with Elijah Mitchell and JaMychal Hasty, it's going to be like, who the hell knows now in terms of running back touches. So Sermon is the one with the highest draft capital. Elijah Mitchell has the big week 1 after Raheem Mostert goes down. So do we take the 104 yards and the score that Elijah Mitchell has in a relief role against a team that we expected a running back to go off against? Just happened to be Mitchell. It could have easily been Mostert. It could be Sermon, and if it was this sort of situation with him as the lead back. Now, Mitchell is probably going to be the number 1 waiver if you have a ordering sort of situation for fantasy leagues. I'm fine with that. It seems like a trap. Now, if you're playing a fab league, which is the way I recommend waivers actually run, 15% of your fab is the most I would put on Mitchell. Now, that sounds pretty low, and it is low because it's just as likely that Trey Sermon or just as likely as JaMychal Hasty to be the starter. There's no guarantee with Kyle Shanahan that the running back you think is going to be out there is the one that actually has the big performance. We've seen injuries play into us in the past. We've just seen them splitting roles and splitting touches and splitting carries and all this sort of thing. And it's very frustrating. This whole team was frustrating, right? So they score a ton, right? They go up 38-10, and this game finishes 41-33. And that was, halfway through the third quarter when that 28-point, deficit was happening. Lance comes in, throws a 5-yard touchdown pass. We never see him again. Mostert gets hurt in a smash spot. Michael Hasty and Michael Hasty and Elijah Mitchell both score touchdowns. So it's not even one guy gets both scores. There's also the receivers, right? So not only does Mostert go down, but Brandon Ayuk, what happens with him? Plays 26 snaps, which is 47% of all offensive snaps for the team. Sees 0 targets, and Deebo Samuel goes and destroys the world. If you played against Deebo Samuel, you lost this week. I played him apparently against him in like 8 leagues. I don't know why. I got so unlucky. But that's 8 leagues where I'm definitely losing, because between the 79-yard touchdown reception, finished with 189 yards and score. I believe the only receiver to beat him on the week, I believe, is Tyreek Hill, who almost had 200 with a big yardage score of his own. I don't know what to think about San Francisco, because this is a very difficult team to see where the points can be coming from. Because just as likely next week, Brandon Ayuk can have 150 receiving yards, and Deebo Samuel disappears. George Kittle always involved, but who knows how physical he is, so he might disappear for a half because he took too hard of a shot into his knee. And this is a very frustrating team. It's a team I love to have, but I am a little worried after week 1 with how Ayuk was used, and with the running backs now being kind of a mess. If Sermon is the only guy, good. I love to rank him as the one and be very confident in that. I'd like to say Samuel and Ayuk are both wide receiver 2s or flexes, and George Kittle is George Kittle. But if they're going to bring Lance in for weird stuff, and they're going to just say, oh, Ayuk, you don't even get targets today. Sorry, that's not happening for you. Then I get a little testy. And even the San Francisco DST doesn't even get to come away with an amazing performance after being up 28 points and a pick 6. So just, a massive garbage time game, and better days, hopefully, for more consistent analysis out of San Francisco, because I don't know how much we actually learned out of them this week. Detroit. My one big thing for them was going to be, is there any wide receivers we can look at as a primary option? And that is a big old no, because Hawkinson, DeAndre Swift, and Jamal Williams are the only lines I'm currently interested in. But a few things played into that. One, the giant, massive deficit they faced. The 28-point deficit led to just garbage time being 2 full quarters. So you had just big stat lines for DeAndre Swift, who had both 11 carries and 11 targets. Not overall touches, targets. TJ Hawkins also getting to double digits, almost had 100 yards on the day. Jamal Williams, 9 targets and 9 carries. If they're going to use their biggest asset, which is a very strong offensive line, and use Williams and Swift, and with Anthony Lynn there, one thing he's always been able to do is get the most out of his running backs. If we have another situation again where he's going to have a dynamic running back lead, and they're going to have a more of a plotter guy who can still be used in other ways, if Williams and Swift are going to be used this much and this often, I'm big fans of having Swift be as an RB2, and we might have Jamal Williams as a low RB2. We've seen teams like this. Antonio Gibson, JD McKissic were both very good last year. We've seen multiple Chargers teams, like Danny Woodhead and Stephen Ridley at times, if that was even the right player. So many different backfields that get mixed up in my head with Anthony Lynn, but he turns out good running back production, and we just saw it here with Williams and Swift. But otherwise, we have 5 different receivers catch a reception from Goff in this contest. That means that there is really not a guy that I want to be keying in as the one. It's also, this is a 74-point game. There's 57 pass attempts. There's not really much I could take away for the receivers in a contest that's going to be this bloated with stats. But I would say play any and all players against Detroit. They averaged 9 yards per play given up to San Francisco in this one. I know that includes a 79-yard reception, but still there's a caveat that over 6-7 yards per play is not very good, and I think you're going to see Detroit be in a lot of situations like this year. So that might be great for Hawkins and Swift and Williams to just be garbage time all the time. Arizona versus Tennessee. Arizona wins 38-13. I got one half of this game extremely correct, which is the Arizona side, and I got one half of this game pretty incorrect, which was the Tennessee side. So Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, both smash. Awesome. Great. Love that Hopkins got 2 touchdowns. Kyler Murray made some really great throws. He had like a 50-yard dart to Christian Kirk off his back foot. Love to see this. But let's talk about the more difficult players. So the running back split, right? Running back split down the middle for touches, 16-16, Edmonds to Connor. Edmonds 40 snaps to 34 for Connor. Edmonds would be the straight up better play in points per game for PPR purposes. And he does have a solid overall PPR day with the receptions. And the one big thing here with Arizona is always going to be, is there any receiver behind Hopkins that would be an actual fantasy option between Rondale Moore, Christian Kirk, AJ Green? It is Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk has 2 scores in the game. He accomplishes a third of his entire 2020 touchdown total in week 1, and which makes me a little worried that people are going to overpay for him in fab. He is one of the better on the board receiving options in terms of who you're going to be looking to pick up. I think still no more than 10% is what I'm looking at right now. I do think this Arizona Cardinals offense is going to be one of the more prolific in football, but I don't want to be chasing points this heavily. And this really looks like one, especially off a 2 touchdown score. You want to see people drop 25, 35, whatever amount of percent on a receiver in week 1. There's injuries bound to happen. There are backfields and receiving cores that people are going to emerge. I don't want to be putting too much down on a week 1 2 touchdown performance, especially when one side of the ball was just pretty much getting decimated all over the place. Chandler Jones has been decreed the owner of the Tennessee Titans because after that 5 sacks performance against an above average offensive line, I think he deserves to be. And that's really the theme of the day. Tennessee just had a very bad football game. Henry getting stopped on back-to-back plays on the one. Julio Jones being denied a touchdown in the end zone, which I guess isn't too far off of what he normally does. But 5 different drives being, turnover on downs or fumbles or any sort of weird situation go down for them. It was not a good day for them. You have Josh Reynolds not even active this game. Anthony Ferkshire doesn't see targets. I was trying to find out which would be the next best guy. You have AJ Brown, you have Julio Jones, you got Derrick Henry, who all don't really particularly have great fantasy days. And do we have another option? Is there another guy? I was hoping to see really more offensive production so we can at least find a 4th player that we can say, okay, we want to get this guy into our lineups because at least he's going to be able to run loose a little bit and be able to pick up touchdowns in, awkward sort of spots. So like a desperation flex sort of guy, that sort of, motto. Do we really get that? I don't particularly think so. Is Chester Rogers a guy that you really want to go and pick up? Probably not. Seeing 6 targets in the game, only behind AJ Brown, tied with Julio Jones for second most on the team. That's a no from me. I want to see what Josh Reynolds at least looks like. Josh Reynolds is at least a guy that we have some sort of faith in being consistently good. And I don't want to just say that 1 week out Chester Rogers is really enough to me to say you should probably go pick him up. Moving on to the Seattle Seahawks and the Indianapolis Colts. Seattle wins 28-16. Starting with Seattle, my one big thing was a new playbook was going to look like. Seattle ran for their first 7 offensive plays, a run. And then they, kind of get bailed out with deep balls to Lockett. Then to their second drive, that's just alternating pass and run plays with a score to Everett. Then they have some short drives that ends in punts, and their 4th drive was a 69-yard score to Lockett. And it seems the answer was here, let Russ cook. But the problem I have with letting Russ cook is that big plays kind of bailed them out. They didn't have a lot of sustained drives. So the longest drive was 9 plays, which occurred on their first drive of the game. They didn't get over 7 for the rest of the contest. And that's an issue to me because it looks like they were just having things go their way, ending scores. But in the second half, they slowed down pretty considerably, right? Besides the drive that ended in a Metcalf score, they had 5, all the rest of the drives in the second half were all of 5 plays or less that ended in punts. So we're going to be looking at, is the Seattle offense now back to that first half of 2020? Probably not right there just yet. We do like to see long touchdowns. We like to see better offensive production than they did in the second half of the year. But I still think this is a weird Seattle offensive team, and I kind of don't want to put too much that, hey, what we saw in the second half of the year doesn't exist anymore. We're back to first half 2020 when the Seattle Seahawks offense was, the best in football. But the only other really main takeaway here is Chris Carson, which is he's firm in control of the backfield, mostly because, Rashad Penny leaves this game with a calf injury, and that's just terrible for a guy who just consistently cannot stay healthy. And he does fumble in this one. He's had fumble issues in the past, but it looks like we're finally past, Carroll, possibly putting the doghouse for these sort of things. They don't really have other options to do so. Chris Carson's their best running back in this backfield. He showed how, at least from a yardage standpoint, he is the guy. But it's still something to really just be looked at. If Rashad Penny is ever healthy, what's it really going to look like? But we just may never know. Moving on to Indianapolis, one big thing was the running back rotation. And between Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Taylor, both useful players to use your roster. Nyheim Hines he's a receiver. He's going to really be looked at as he's probably, the number one receiver for this team because they particularly don't really have one. So that's going to be my big real look when I'm looking at this depth chart is that they kind of just have a mess of receivers between Pascal, Pittman Jr., Paris Campbell, T.Y. Hilton whenever he gets back. And even with Pascal scoring twice in the game, which is very much okay, cool, week one, don't buy anything into that at all. But Nyheim Hines and John Taylor, with 15 targets between the two of them, they're their main source of offense. And then the other guys just kind of mix in whenever their number's called or whenever they're open. And it's just really, they're not going to be the primary focus. It's just using those running backs and using those running backs they did, 17 carries for Taylor, 9 carries for Hines. A name that has been brought up has been Marlin Mack. And Mack, to my knowledge, was not inactive for this game. He was just not used. You had Taylor and Hines see snaps on offense. Jordan Wilkins saw snaps exclusive with the special teams. If Mack is just not even an option, that's good because that means there's at least one less mouth to feed in the offense, one less guy to take touches away from Taylor, who was a guy that was being drafted in the first or second round. And Hines then becomes an RB2 flex sort of guy who can now be put into your lineups with some sort of safety that he can, come down with 5-6 receptions a week. Comes down with, I believe 7 here, 6 receptions for 48 yards. And listen, that's 10.8 points just from the receiving yards. Anything else he brings up on the ground, that's what we want to see. That's where we like to see out of our running backs. In Hines, guys like him, guys like Cohen has in the past, we like this type of running back who can pick up points in ways that can be very safe options for your fantasy team. Moving on to the Los Angeles Chargers and the Washington football team. Los Angeles Chargers win this game 20-16. One big thing from the Chargers is really going to be if Austin Eckler did not play in this game, and he does, which really just says, okay, we don't have to really spend too much time on the backup running backs besides Larry Roundtree, who was brought up earlier in the show. At least we found out that he is atop of the list behind Eckler right now. Whether or not that stays consistent, who's to say? But at least right now, it's Eckler, then Roundtree for the moment, right? So, yay, Austin Eckler plays. Cool. He scores. Cool. Has 7 red zone carries. Okay, that's quite a bit. He sees no targets in this game. That's very interesting that he sees 7 red zone carries, not a player that we've seen really pounding the ball inside near the goal line. But he doesn't see any receiving work, which is really the whole purpose of what Austin Eckler is. To be rectified in week 2. We'll see exactly what kind of happens there. And especially with the receiver as well. Keenan Allen, yay. Mike Williams, yay. Well, we haven't been tricked by Mike Williams before, right? So Mike Williams, 9 targets in week 1 of 2020, sees 5 over the next 2 weeks, in weeks 2 and 3 in 2020 combined. And, he only did have 1 week of over double-digit targets, which was week 16 in 2020. So we've seen Mike Williams have some issues with staying healthy, some issues with just being a deep ball guy who has a giant yards per reception, but he can't garner multiple receptions per game. If they're going to use him in different, more creative ways and get him the football and just, hey, these are our big options, Allen, Eckler, Williams, and Jared Cook as well. Good, because we want to consolidate targets, and if it's just going to the guys we want to play, well, then I'm pretty happy with the LA Chargers, a team that I was, again, very heavily invested in the preseason. I think this is going to be a great offense, and I think they pull out a nice win here over the Washington football team for sure. And Jared Cook, as I aforementioned, I keep him in mind. with waivers, if you are in need of a tight end, played almost the amount of same snaps as Donald Parham, but does pretty much greatly out target him. Parham only comes away with this one target in the game. Moving over to Washington, my one big thing was going to be, with no Samuel, how is Thomas going to play? Is Diami Brown? Yada, yada, yada. Logan Thomas, cool, catches a touchdown. I'd still like to see a real safety net of work for me to say, I was wrong on him coming out of the preseason, which I think is optimistic. Me saying, hey, I want to see more about what this guy is actually going to be in a week-to-week basis than, okay, cool, he scores, so now put him, immediately back to whatever sore spot you were thinking of in the preseason, and I was down on him. And I don't also want to hold too heavily against him. He only comes away with 3 targets, right? And then Diami Brown was interesting as well because he finishes the day for -2 yards. That ties Kadarius Toney with some of the lowest yardage for a receiver on the day. So that's fun. But the other option, Adam Humphries, only comes away with 2 targets for 10 yards on 2 receptions. So it's Logan Thomas, it's Antonio Gibson, it's Terry McLaurin. It's their show. And the show's going to change. The director is going to change, if you will, because Ryan Fitzpatrick will be out 6 to 8 weeks with a hip injury. Taylor Heineke completes 11 of 15 passes, 122 yards and a score. I like to think that they might be on a call to go pick up one of the 4 quarterbacks that Philadelphia has just to flesh out the roster. To be seen how exactly this changed everything up, because at least one thing I held against Logan Thomas is that Ryan Fitzpatrick doesn't target tight ends. Well, at least for the next 6 to 8 weeks, that's going to change my opinion of that player at the very least. We're on to Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Houston Texans. Jacksonville is going to be a bad team, but Houston's going to be also a very bad team, but possibly not as worse because Houston wins this game 37-21. This game, I don't know how much we can take from it and be truth because this just exists in a zone of suck. Both these teams are bad. They're going to be awful. And I don't really want to roster too many of these players because it's going to be, I just think, a headache every sort of week. And if they're not playing bad teams like each other, I don't know how productive they're going to be. Because my one big thing for both teams was, is there a second player worth rostering and worth starting outside the main 2? One was James Robinson, who did not have a good game. One was Brandon Cooks, who had an excellent game. I think Jacksonville kind of game scripts Robinson out with them getting down pretty heavily early. I think we learned nothing in the ordering of what their receiver hierarchy is going to be. DJ Chark leads the team in targets with 12, but only comes away with 3 receptions. Both he and Marvin Jones score, which is great. It was total garbage time, though. I still would like to think that James Robinson is the only player I'm starting on Jacksonville with confidence, and my confidence is lowering. And then over on the Houston Texans side, Brandon Cooks is a stud, 132-yard game. He is the one guy I'm very much confident on the Houston side, even in tougher matchups. I think he has the talent to really showcase even in tougher corner covers than anything Jackson would throw his way. All the running backs score, and you can take from that whatever you will. For some reason, Mark Ingram gets 26 carries, and for some reason, Danny Amendola still exists and score. And I just don't know what else to make from this game. We learned nothing, and our time was wasted, and it was a bad football game. So I don't want to talk about it anymore. Cleveland versus Kansas City. This was a great football game. Kansas City wins 33-29, and they do so in a manner that you understand what Kansas City is going to do. They're going to throw the ball to Hill. They're going to throw the ball to Kelsey. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to show up whenever he kind of feels like, right? Which he didn't really do until the second half. And they're just still going to beat you. And it's insanity to me. You know exactly what they're going to do it, and they're still going to beat you with it. But starting with Cleveland, though. My one big thing was going to be about Odell Beckham Jr. Odell Beckham Jr. was not active for this game. So unfortunately, we're going to see towards week 2. He'll probably be one big thing for Cleveland in week 2, because I really want to see what does Odell look like. And this was going to be, I think, the big, possible, like, here I am, I can still play like I used to sort of moment. We didn't get that. We were kind of denied in week 1. But let's see kind of what we can do when he's finally fully healthy. I was actually very surprised he was not active for this one. If we saw other players who dealt with ACL injuries were active and ready for week 1, and I thought he was a little bit further along. Now I'm a little bit worried that he doesn't play in week 2, but I guess we'll see. Nick Chubb was the only player with multiple rushing touchdowns in week 1, and I still just die a little bit anytime Kareem Hunt gets valuable work, does score in this game. Nick Chubb, if they were just to let him loose, I think he's going to set the world on fire, and he almost did so in week 1 with the doubles and touchdowns, but still just want a little bit more out of him. One of my also big misses on the week, Austin Hooper. I mean, it wasn't a huge miss. I had my top 12. I thought if you're ever going to need a tight end streamer, or going to be happy with starting Austin Hooper, I thought this would be the spot. He's in a total timeshare between him, David Njoku, Harrison Bryant. I don't think there's really a tight end that's going to be very valuable for our purposes. For they kind of like having all 3 tight ends be worked in, but for us, that's not something we like. And I actually want to see what the whole sort of rotation looks like, or whole situation really plays out when Odell Beckham Jr. is active. I do want to, see also for Jarvis Landry's purposes, what's really going to be sort of the breakdown in target work when you have a player like Odell step back onto the field. Kansas City. My one big thing was going to be about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because honestly, the big 3 of Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, we never need to tell you when to start them. They're always going to be amazing. They're the Kansas City just told you what they're going to do, which is throw to Kelce and Hill, and they didn't have any other player have more than 3 targets, and they still just came back and snatched a win away from Cleveland. It's just kind of heartbreaking stuff for Browns fans. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire, it's odd. Did he get like reverse game script? As soon as they started like wanting to kind of get back into the game, they starting to run the ball as well. It was throw the ball to Hill, throw the ball to Kelce, and also start using Clyde, because of his 14 carries, he saw 11 in the third quarter or later, and 2 of his 3 targets came in the second half as well. So for the entirety of the first half, he had 4 touches. I don't really particularly see why, especially when most teams, I can say, at least want to slow progressively get the ball moving, over time, and kind of keep things slow in the first, second quarter. And they kind of just were very slow out the gate and were kind of clunky. So truly seeing how that's going to really be looking out for him. Got a question in the chat. Do you think Baker Mayfield will do good this year? Do you think he would be better than Matt Ryan, for example? I have more confidence that Matt Ryan will be producing fantasy points on a weekly basis, but we didn't see any of that. I thought in a very comfortable week 1 matchup. I think Baker Mayfield's great if you want to have 18 to 22 fantasy points and you're never looking for anything more, but you very much don't want anything less. I think that's where he really falls into. Matt Ryan, you can have a 12 fantasy point game, you can have a 32 fantasy point game, and I think it's just kind of risk averse to see really what you're going to do. He was the only quarterback that I had in my top 12 that I did not rank as a top 12 option. Baker Mayfield was just a few spots behind him, around like quarterback 15 or 16. This was, I thought, going to be a big points sort of situation. We have 60 plus points scored in this game. So does every Cleveland Browns game look like this? No, they're not playing the Kansas City Chiefs every single week. I think they're going to be able to control opposing offense a little bit better and just kind of dominate with Chubb and Hunt. So it's to me a matter of how many times is Baker Mayfield scoring, throwing 2 touchdown passes, 3 touchdown passes, that sort of thing. Where Matt Ryan, I think if they're going to be any bit successful on offense, they need Matt Ryan to do things, when Cleveland very much does not need Baker Mayfield to win them games. They just kind of need him to not lose them games and keep them interesting. But thank you for the question. Moving on to the Miami Dolphins versus the New England Patriots. Another game that I kind of got right in terms of a whole game script sort of situation. Only one of 2 games, the New York Jets and the Carolina Panthers game as the other one, that didn't see either team reaching 20 real life points. This was a game where I thought there wasn't going to be a lot of smash starts. There was going to be a lot of you need to play these sort of players, especially in full PPR purposes, because it's going to be a player that gets 100 rushing yards in this game and technically has a bad fantasy day. But starting with Miami, one big thing for Miami is going to be, and this is, again, a season-long thing, was going to be Tua. If we're looking for a Justin Herbert type guy, who is not getting drafted, because a lot of the rookies, I got leagues where I got Justin Fields on my bench, just sitting there for whenever that happens. Trey Lance, Mac Jones, yada, yada, all the guys. Tua is a player I was hoping, for a little more for the season. Again, week one, I did not think this was going to be a big scoring fest. Waddle was really the kind of the one guy from this whole game outside of Nelson Aguilar, who weren't probably, hopefully not starting. I thought of starting. But Waddle's really the only guy who has like a good fantasy day for what his position is and what his point totals ended up being. There was other, Jamar Chase was the most fantasy points of all the rookie receivers, but, nice game for him. Gaskin, 9 carries, not great, but the 5 targets is what we want. It was just not really this sort of situation for him because those 5 targets is third most on the team. But if that carry total, at least if he was leading in it, but we want to see a little bit more work out of him in the future. But again, I thought this played out exactly how I thought it was going to be, a slog of a game, and that's kind of what it ended up being in fruition. New England Patriots. One big thing was going to be those preseason thoughts I had on the tight ends. Johnny Smith, 4th in targets. Hunter Henry, 7th in targets. Not big fan of those numbers. To be seen going forward exactly how they're going to be really implementing these guys. Johnny Smith especially was a player I was very high on at tight end in the preseason. But week one, let's see how these guys would play a few weeks down the line. And I was not very overtly happy with how this game was going to play out, and we saw that came to happen. And Damian Harris, love that he had 100 yards. Awesome. It's still but full PPR. He finishes with like 11.7 fantasy points in the day, has the fumble, does not score, does not have a ton of receptions. That's the name of the game. You can run for 100 yards every single game and do nothing, and you're technically a bad fantasy player. So that's just kind of how the cookie crumbles there. Green Bay versus New Orleans. So New Orleans wins 38-3, and this is probably the most pathetic game on the day. My one big thing starting with Green Bay was supposed to be, is there a second wide receiver to roster on Green Bay? I don't know if there was a second player to play on Green Bay outside of like Devontae Adams. I don't know what this was. They didn't play their major players in the preseason. I guess they just need to get more reps. This was pretty gross. They do get the Detroit Lions next week, so I'd like to say that's a big bounce back spot, but there's people flying with the ideas that Rodgers is trying to sink this team so he can go do Jeopardy stuff. This is almost a game I want to just rewatch, and it's just what happened on the Green Bay side. I don't think we learned anything from this. I like to say there's nothing to take away from them just being overtly pathetic, and that's the word, pathetic, on Sunday. New Orleans, my one big thing was Jameis Winston, right call for the New Orleans Saints. It looks like that after he hangs, 5 touchdowns on Green Bay, only 21 passes, which also makes me think we don't have much to really come away from this one as well. Marcus Callaway gets the Jay Alexander treatment. You have Juwan Johnson. Alvin Kamara is great, and it's just I'm holding real judgment on anything that kind of came from this one being factual. When a team that we think has NFC championship aspirations and the Green Bay Packers just get completely smoked, with Rodgers getting benched for Jordan Love, I don't know what to make of this one. Deontay Harris with a 55-yard reception, great. Juwan Johnson with 2 touchdowns, cool. Adam Troutman leads the team in targets after seeing that he might be having a season-ending injury against the Jacksonville Jaguars in the preseason. This is another game between this and the Houston Jacksonville game. I think these were terrible football games in different regards. I don't think we learned much from them. You're starting your Green Bay players, I think, with a good amount of, I'm not going to say a good amount, a very much amount of confidence against Detroit in week 2. Moving on to the Denver Broncos and New York Giants. Denver wins this game 27-13, starting on the Denver Broncos side. My one big thing was undeniably, like I said, the Javonte Williams usage. I do find it, oddly satisfying that they had a 50-50 split in running back work, just right down the middle in snaps, 33-33. Does Gordon have a 77-yard touchdown run? Of course he does, and that's #good. But Javonte Williams, I think, indeed, is at one point now they're going to be the lead guy in this backfield. It looks like that time frame has been pushed up a little bit with him now splitting just straight down the line work in week 1. If there's ever going to be a time to start Melvin Gordon with confidence, I think it was going to be in this week 1 game. Now it's going to get a little bit messier, and the distance between the two is going to shrink in, and possibly Javonte Williams leapfrogging Gordon sooner rather than later. Otherwise, other news in Denver, Jerry Jeudy. We thought at first this was going to be a major injury that we were going to be talking about, possibly him missing the season. Right now, it's just listed as a high ankle sprain, but it looked just so much worse. So we have to talk about what does this mean for the rest of the Broncos. Tim Patrick, who really was the wide receiver one in terms of production for Denver in 2020, he's up there with the lead waiver options of the week. Is it still a guy I'm going to be spending a good amount of fab on? No, around 10%. And if those numbers sound low, it's because it's week one and injuries and situations will be playing out every single week in the NFL. And you should not be spending a ton of your bankroll here in these week one options. Otherwise, moving on to the New York Giants. My one big thing was, how does the Giants O-line handle an expected solid pass rush? Well, we didn't have Bradley Chubb in this game, which kind of plays into the fact that they only had 2 sacks allowed on the day. And the only 2 quarterback hits that I saw recorded through ProFootballReference.com. So one big bright spot for the offense was undeniably Sterling Shepard, who I talked slightly about, saying I think if Evan Ingram was to miss the game, who was out here, that it would kind of propel him to being a better option. And I thought with Kenny Galladay and Saquon Barkley coming along a little slowly, that he'd be a fine option. I didn't expect him to have an amazing day like he did. And it's really just a matter of, I'm a little worried that Barkley and Galladay are going to be slow as well for week 2. Because if there's an offense that I think is in a very extremely poor spot, as I see the Ravens score over my computer, there was a team I was looking at that might be in a tough spot to have the Thursday night football turnaround. It's New York Giants taking on Washington on Thursday night. Barkley and Galladay, I'm slightly worried about still being ineffective. They do have Atlanta in week 3, and then they have the New Orleans Saints in week 4, who are apparently a defensive juggernaut to shut down the vaunted Green Bay Packers. So there's just something to consider. Barkley and Galladay might still be fine to poor fantasy options in week 2 if Washington is in a spot like they could possibly be. Last game of the show, Chicago versus the LA Rams. Rams won this pretty handily, 34-14. Starting over the Chicago side, one big thing was going to be, what was the usage going to look like with Damian Williams filling in for Tariq Cohen in that role? Well, he sees 5 targets, 4th on the team, so pushing him to a spot that, hey, Chicago still wants this type of player. They still value this type of player. It's kind of a desperation running back spot, but Montgomery does leave this game at one point, does come back. If anything is to happen to, Montgomery, we see Williams already filling in for Cohen. He can fill in carry work for Montgomery as well. Montgomery, man, he definitely proved me wrong. He is good, and he doesn't need Dalton to help him be good, which is unfortunate because Allen Robinson does need Dalton to be good. And we just got a small taste of what Twitter can explode over when Justin Fields touches the ball, because he comes in for 3 touches, scores, and Twitter goes nuts. And it's the plan all along was to not have Fields out there in week 1, majority of the time. It was still Andy Dalton's show. It's to be seen what's going to look like in week 2, but the only person who can really make that decision right now is Matt Nagy, and Matt Nagy's guy at the moment is Andy Dalton. They also didn't expect him to be in a situation to even have Justin Fields, but that's really neither here nor there. Over to the Los Angeles Rams. This team is good. Good team is good. One big thing for the good team that is good is Tyler Higbee. One big thing was how it was going to be on the field enough to be worth the top 12 billing, and he played 100% of the snaps. I was a little shocked to see that stat. And if he's going to be on the field as much as we could possibly hope and imagine him to be, we have 4 fantasy relevant players here outside of Matt Stafford. We got Woods and Kupp and Higbee and Henderson. And of course, Henderson's going to have his workload kind of hit into a little bit whenever Sony Michel really gets his legs under him over there in LA. With him being traded so late in the preseason, there's really no surprise that he only got like 1 or 2 touches in this entire game. So enjoy Henderson at his full workload, but to be seeing exactly how long that is going to last. I believe Woods and Kupp are going to be exchanging who is the primary guy week to week. Kupp, it was very funny on that long touchdown pass from Matthew Stafford that there wasn't really a player within 10 yards of him on the score. So Chicago kind of egg on their face on that one. But with that, We're going to be back on Wednesday, hopefully at our normal time. I had a little bit of stuff go down today, so I couldn't be on at 7:30. But should be back on 7:30 to preview the Thursday night football game. A little bit of recap on this Monday night football game. It looks like it's going to be in the second quarter in a second. But with that, I have been Matt McCarthy over here at GridironRatings.com, senior redraft analyst. We'll be talking to you guys again 3 days a week. And again, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you have Getting Defensive. And on Wednesday afternoons, you have the Off the Grid show. So make sure you subscribe and like and view and enjoy all that content we have here for Gridiron Ratings. And I am Matt McCarthy. Thank you. If this was the first time or last time, enjoy our time that we spent together. And I will see you guys in the next one.